Hello, my loves. Here we are for the second half of my Incendiary review of The Red Goddess by Peter Gray. I finally finished reading this book yesterday. I had to walk away and take a break from it for a little bit, which really says a lot. And my overall feel for the book has remained the same since when I started it. Not overly impressed with this author's tone of voice when he's speaking about, I think, especially women in regards to the goddess Babylon. Now, of course, as I said in the first video, we all experience deity in our own ways. And so I do not want to negate that this is how Peter experiences his relationship with Babylon the Great. But I did find that the book continued in much the same vein of how it started, which felt to me like we were degrading women and degrading Babylon to a certain extent. And I'm sure for some people, they won't find Peter's tone that way, but unfortunately for me, that's really been my takeaway. And so I did make some notes on some things I wanted to share, and I wanted to make sure to finish reviewing the book as a whole so I could share my complete thoughts. And if you've been on the fence about purchasing this book, almost said deck, you'll kind of know what to expect, perhaps. I did, let's see. On page 130, he says, Babylon rides like Lilith on Adam. When we read that Babylon is mystery, it means that Babylon is sex. We are at the heart of it. There is no time but now, Babylon and beast locked in eternal copulation. If you hold her in holy awe, then remember that this is an equal and opposite force. Here talking about the beast and Babylon, which I thought was, a nice way of speaking about Babylon, but he's very derisive about Lilith. And again, he goes in at the end. I think I made a note here. Let me see if I did. Let's see. Where he's discussing Lilith, and it's a bit derisive, I feel, for how if you're choosing to worship or work with Lilith and Babylon, it doesn't mean like you have to hate all other goddesses if you love one, right? And I do get that feel from Peter's work, and just the derision he holds other faces of the goddess in has really led me as a reader to feel like he's reduced Babylon and women to being only these sexual beings. And sexuality is beautiful, and it is a spiritual expression to me, and there is nothing like intentional ways of raising energy either by ourselves or with partners sexually when it comes to spiritual work. It's a beautiful, wonderful practice, but it's not the only aspect of being a woman. And so there was one particular part here in the second half that really got me worked up. It's on page 176. He says here, one of the cruel truths about love goddesses is that they favor the beautiful. To be a priestess, devotee, or avatar of the love goddess requires beauty. This is not fair or kind or politically correct, but neither is nature. So he goes on to say that basically, like, what I took from this was Babylon's beautiful, and if you want to work with Babylon as a woman and invoke her energy, then you need to be beautiful too, which automatically sets some of us aside, even if that's only in our own heads. Like, how do we know that we're beautiful enough to be a devotee of Babylon? How do we know that our beauty is something that Babylon's going to accept as being in alignment with her beauty? And if we're not beautiful, then we don't get to experience her divinity, and we don't get to practice the path with that. That is so confounding to me and just fucking ridiculous. Like, beauty, first of all, is subjective. And second of all, I think beauty is an energetic space. that we hold, and each and every one of us holds that within ourselves. So to say you have to be physically good looking in order to be a priestess or work with Babylon's energy just seems pointless. It just seems so like off. It was incredibly off-putting to me. And then I feel like he backpedals on that here and there, because he's like, every woman is Babylon. Babylon is every woman. Babylon loves everyone. She basically wants to fuck everyone, right? It's how she experiences love, is through the experience of sex, right? And it just felt very, very flat, very, very like one-dimensional, and very like, I don't know, like my takeaway from this book is actually feeling kind of a bit sad that we've had to pigeonhole a goddess who is not just, while spoken of in Revelation and seen through Crowley's eyes as a sexual goddess. That's not the only aspect of her. And why does sexuality only have to look that one way? Do you have to be a conventionally attractive woman, who's young, in order to work with her? I don't know. I just found this book to actually be off-putting and kind of flattens her beautiful dimensionality into something that should be empowering for women, and instead becomes just a further aspect of having to match up to some form of male, aspect of whether you're good enough or not to work with her. And again, he brings up in regards to Lilith how angry women are at men, which is just like, it seems like Peter has a little bit of a hang up. I think we really get to know Peter in this book. I don't think we were really getting to know Babylon. And I think that's how I would sum this book up. I think we all know a lot about Peter leaving this book, not so much about Babylon. Now, if you do want a little insight into Crowley and the Book of Revelations, yes, he does cover that. And at the end, he does go into various tools within sex magic, and he does talk about working with roses and blood in regards to Babylon. And I did, I did bookmark the mirror, because I actually do use mirrors a great deal in my own magic, and I do agree with him on the mirror magic when it comes to Babylon. He says, for Babylon, the mirror, on page 180, for Babylon, the mirror is a magical tool and an open door into our world. In works of evocation, possession, and fascination, we can gain fresh perspectives through the looking glass, of course, only if we're attractive enough. But please note the sarcasm dripping out of my voice as I say that. I do agree with him on this aspect of mirror work as a very palpable way to connect with Babylon. And he says in the next paragraph, the magical path makes the demand that we know ourselves rather than simply engage in a fuzzy snuggle with our ego. The mirror in this context is a place of confrontation and contemplation. This is not a practice for the narcissist. So I did enjoy that, and I agreed with him there. And I did like that, again, he's so contradictory of himself. But on 190, he says, on the second paragraph here, talking about how the Church of Satan and Crowley have taken women and really confined them to this one space. He says, woman has been viewed as an expedient accessory, a container for the solar force, rather than as a priestess in her own right. This must be changed if we are to have any appreciation of Babylon. Agreed with him. I agree with him there. And I do agree, he talks in here about the act of sex when we talk about penetrative sex, when we talk about merging and uniting with another person, and how that affects both through the penetration and the receptive energy of receiving the penetration, right? That there's an exchange that happens there. A cord of attachment is formed. And I do agree with him on that. And I think anytime we're connecting with a lover, we are forming an attachment of sorts, an energetic attachment of sorts. And how we play that out, of course, is unique for each connection and for each person or individual. But I do agree with him about that. And so I did appreciate that he put that in there, because he does talk a lot about, kind of wanton sex and abandon and like giving yourself over to this sexuality and to the act of sex and various depraved ways of having sex in order to connect with Babylon. But he does talk about being very aware of what you are forming from an energetic attachment space when you interact with that energy in this way. And so I did appreciate that he brought that up. On the whole, I don't know. I'm glad that I finished the book, because I didn't want to not finish it, because I do like to finish books when I start them. In a lot of ways, I do feel like I wasted my time. I think I have a much different experience with Babylon, a much richer, a much fuller experience, in my opinion. Again, not to negate Peter's experience with her, and that is uniquely his own, as he expresses and shares here. But I feel that there might be a different path for women to connect with Babylon that would be much more empowering, and much more exciting. So I don't really, honestly, I'm not going to recommend this book. I don't feel like it's a good historical record. He's very sarcastic in his descriptions of the historical record when it comes to Babylon, which is fine. That's his own lens and voice. But I didn't find it to actually be helpful insofar as, like, what are you going to take away from this historically to access when it comes to your own practice with Babylon? And I don't know. I feel like if you're looking for a workbook to connect with Babylon, you're also not going to find that in the Red Goddess. So I'm not really going to recommend it. I still feel the same way I felt in the first video, just a little less angry and more disappointed, with that feeling of, yeah, I can say I completed the book, but I could have been reading something else that actually really resonated a lot more with me. So I don't know. If you're on the fence with this one, I wouldn't go ahead and purchase. I wouldn't invest the time in reading. This isn't the one for me. This isn't how I experienced Babylon. And I will be speaking to that again in further videos. And I do have previous videos from earlier this year talking about working with the energy of Babylon the Great as well. So feel free to check those out. But yes, the journey is over. I'm glad to be stepping away from this book. Very, very glad to be stepping away from this book. I hope you are all doing well out there in the world. I am sending you, as always, so much love and many blessings. I will see you in the next video.